It's often been said, not just on this channel but in life, that people are the scariest monsters out there. It seems there are some truly sick and twisted human beings on this planet who just love to cause terror. These subscribers sent in their allegedly true, creepy stories with people that will truly keep you out of the streets at night. If you have a story that you would like to share on the show, be sure to send it in at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going. Now, without further ado, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and join us for some disturbing and creepy stories. My name is Johnny. This story happened on June 29th, 2018, in the northern region of Florida. I was 21 years old working as a beach photographer that summer with my buddy who had just graduated from the college we attended in Pennsylvania. The company we worked for put us in a 4-bedroom townhouse with about 10 other people. It was a Friday and I had the day off. Everyone else was working that day, so I just sat in the house relaxing and enjoying the quiet. As the day went on, I became more and more anxious because I had not done anything active. I normally walked at least 10 miles a day on the beach taking photos of vacationers, and another day on the beach didn't sound as appealing as taking a break inside with the AC and some quality Netflix. But today I had felt I had been too lazy with my time, so I decided to go for a night walk through the neighborhood behind our housing development. It's nice to walk there at night because it's always really quiet, and there's a lot of nice foliage, mansions, etc. On this particular walk, I discovered a bike trail that I did not know existed before, and decided to check it out. It goes into the woods, and I thought, why not? Maybe being in the trees will remind me of being home in rural Pennsylvania and relax my mind. Little did I know, it would do the exact opposite. The bike trail runs perpendicular to the road and goes along a narrow field of power lines that cut through the woods. It goes for what I would guess about 15 miles at least. I was walking for 20 minutes and all I could hear was the sounds of nature around me. It was actually very calming, despite the fact that the woods always did give me that spooky feeling. It was a nice place to walk, or so I thought. Along my left was the tree line. To the right was the field with a line of telephone poles cutting through the middle of it, and a much less thick tree line on the other side, and some swampy marsh areas. It was a full moon that night, so I wasn't in complete darkness and could see all around me. About 10 to 15 minutes into my walk, some clouds came in and covered the moon, and it got much darker, so I turned on the flashlight on my phone. Shortly afterward, I heard a strange noise coming from right across the field. It sounded like a boar or a pig. It let out a long, low grunt. It didn't sound like any normal sound that an animal would make, as if something had caused it distress. I don't know. It was distorted, that's all I could say. I stood there, listening for another sound, but there were no more. Everything just went quiet. I kept walking, hoping I wouldn't hear this thing again, as it did come out of nowhere and it startled me. And then instantly, I got the feeling that something wasn't right. All of the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I was very unnerved, like I felt like I was being watched. I tried to find where I was, but Google Maps would not load because the service out there was terrible. I eventually ran into another path that veered off into the woods, and there was a map on a board beside it. I stared down the path for a few seconds, contemplating whether or not to take this. This looked like a cliched shortcut that looks super scary but gets you to your destination faster. This one was dark, and I mean dark. There was a thick canopy above, as part of the woods was very, very thick, and there was only about a foot between the thick trees and the path on both sides. Without the light of my phone, I would not have been able to see a thing in there. I decided to turn and walk along this path, as it was quicker. instead of going all the way back around the way I originally came. Then, right as I was about to head down said path, I heard footsteps. I stopped and turned my flashlight off to listen. I wanted to make sure I wasn't just going crazy and scaring myself, but I could indeed still hear them. They were coming towards me from the direction I was originally headed on the main path. I ran over into the trees and hid because I wasn't about to run into a potentially crazy person out here in the woods. As I was hiding in the trees and waiting for them to pass me, I instantly smelled something horrible. I thought maybe I was just so scared that I had pooped myself or something, but that wasn't the case. It smelled like something decomposing, like the smell of a deer carcass baking out in the sun. If you've been hunting, you know that smell. The footsteps became increasingly closer, then they passed me. I counted 3 people, or should I say silhouettes, and I couldn't make out their faces or even their clothes. They walked in a line, their heads staring straight ahead of them, and none of them saying a word. The one in the middle was dragging some sort of bag behind them on the concrete. I waited about another 5 minutes or so until I could no longer see them, hear them, or smell that smell anymore, and I started walking down the path. I tried walking quickly, but I wanted to stay quiet, as I was pretty freaked out. I was wearing flip-flops, and they clicked my heels with every step, so the slower I was, the quieter I was. I walked for about 10 minutes, and I started to hear footsteps again. I stopped and turned off my flashlight. The footsteps were coming from behind me this time. I ran back into the trees and waited to see if it was those people again. And inevitably, it was. They brought the awful smell back with them and walked past the same way, dragging that bag behind them. Were these people following me? Why did that happen to turn around and come onto this path as well? I stayed there in the bushes for about 20 minutes, unsure of what to do. I didn't know if I should keep going that way I was going, or if I should run all the way back. As I waited, they came by yet again, and this is the really freaky part. This time, I heard a man's voice say a girl's name, Barbara Ann Wilcox, or something like that. I waited another 5 minutes and just started running down the path. I picked up my flip-flops to make sure I didn't make any noise, and I didn't even turn my flashlight back on. I ran for what honestly seemed like 10 minutes until I eventually had to come to a stop to take a breath. I was still in complete darkness and I turned my flashlight on to make sure I was not being followed. I didn't smell that horrible smell, so I turned the flashlight back off to save my phone's battery and not to give myself away. I didn't know how much longer I had to keep going, as this path did not look nearly as long on the map. Then I began to hear sticks breaking in the woods. They didn't sound like footsteps, but rather random. One would break to the left, then one to the right a few moments later. They started to get louder, and I eventually bolted again. I ran, and I ran, and I ran. I was afraid that if I turned around, there would be something chasing me. The sticks breaking seemed to follow along on both sides not too far behind me. This was a fight or flight situation, and I fled as fast as I could. After what seemed like running for an hour, I eventually saw lights and came out of the woods next to a sewage plant. I hurried home along the highway. No one was home when I returned to the townhouse as they had all went to a beach party. I sat down, got a glass of water, and searched the name I had heard on Google. Barbara Ann Wilcox. This is where it gets strange. In a nutshell, Barbara Ann Wilcox and a friend were from Iowa, and they were hiking through Florida in the 1970s. On their trip, they were murdered by a man named Gerard Schaefer. The cherry on top of the cake is that this happened in 1973 and the skeletal remains of the girls were found scattered throughout the area, which is now known as Oak Hammock Park, in 1977 by a group of fishermen. Why were 3 people, if that's what they even were, walking through the woods at night in the pitch black saying the name of a girl that died over 40 years ago, about 7 hours away in a different part of Florida? And what the hell were they dragging behind them? I'm not sure if I want to know the answers. Throughout the rest of my summer working in Florida, I continued to do my night walks, but I never went on that bike trail again. if you're ever alone in the woods, please be careful. You never know who or what you will find, or worse, will find you. So I live in a small village just outside of Madison, Wisconsin. My roommate and I moved here because frankly the rent is ridiculously cheaper, and it is still close enough to town that we can still do whatever we want. So we found a really nice duplex for rent on the edge of the village. We decided to split the floors to give ourselves a little space after being cramped in a small apartment for a couple of years. He took the upstairs and I took the downstairs. After a couple of months of living there, we noticed that certain things wouldn't be where we left them, and we never really paid any mind to it. But I should let you know that both my roommate and I work second shift at the same factory, so we were always gone at the same time every day. So during Christmas time is when I like to use a bunch of my vacation time in order to kinda have a couple of weeks off without having to waste all of my days. So after my roommate goes to work, I decided to spend a lazy day in bed. So since it's during the winter, it's typically dark around 5:30 p.m. and I'm still laying in bed, but all of a sudden I heard something outside my bedroom window in the basement, which is also right next to the front door. I then see a shadow pass by my window and hear what seems to be someone opening the front door with a key. I do own a firearm, so I hopped out of bed and grabbed my gun. I have a cheap mattress that is kind of loud, so I think he may have heard me. But by the time I loaded my magazine and was pointing it up the stairs toward the door, he was gone. Just to double check, I go room to room, looking in every nook and cranny, but thankfully, this person, intruder, or whatever it was nowhere to be found. The scary part is that my door was unlocked, most likely by him, since we hardly used the front door, but used the garage door instead. We changed the locks and set up a couple of cameras, where we did catch someone at our front door a few weeks later, but the man never made it inside. Other than that, we haven't had any issues since. At the end of the day, I find this one creepy, because it goes from what we thought would be a ghost story to something far too real. I'm a 22-year-old female, and this took place when I was around 12 or 13 years old. Before I get started, I want to say that first of all, I am not a good writer, so I hope it's not too much of a pain for you to read this. A friend of mine, I'll call her Mandy, who is also a female around the same age as me. We were hanging out around her apartment complex at the time, which is located next to a police station approximately 60 yards away from it. We were just grabbing a bite from a takeaway, which is also located around the area, when suddenly, a man behind us started shouting at us. Mandy and I froze for a second and waited for the man to walk up to us, as we were way too scared to keep moving. The man told us that he had just been released from jail, and was locked up for a night for being way too drunk and causing trouble. Great, I thought to myself. Mandy and I froze in shock and looked at each other for a moment, contemplating what we should do next, when suddenly the man came closer to us and threatened to hurt us if we tried to go away. It also looked like he had a knife or some sort of sharp weapon in his hand. I am not sure though, as I find it way too scary to properly look at the man. He then asked us for 50 cents, and we told him that we didn't have any money, which seemingly angered him more. I frantically checked all my pockets to find some spare change, and I actually ended up finding $5. I offered my money to the man in hopes of him finally leaving us alone, which he didn't. Of course, I remember thinking to myself, instead, he wanted us to go to the supermarket with him, which is across my friend's apartment complex on the other side of the street. Scared of the man hurting us, we followed him a little bit and thought about ways of losing him while crossing the street, which didn't work as he made sure to be closely next to us and watch our every move. So we actually ended up entering the store with him. When we went in, we tried to get the employees' attention. We were trying to get them to help us, but we weren't very successful. So we strolled around the store with the man closely watching us, then asked us if we knew where the alcohol section of the store is, which we actually did since it's kind of a secluded area on the left side of the store. We told him just that. He then proceeded to look around and didn't pay attention for a second. Mandy and I saw this as a chance to escape, so we booked it to the back of the store and luckily the supermarket's warehouse, which also has an extra exit for delivery, which was wide open. It usually never is, and I haven't seen it opened ever since. We ran in there, with employees actually shouting at us to come back since we're not allowed back there. Thanks for nothing, by the way, but we didn't care. We kept running all the way through the exit and around the corner, where we proceeded to cross the street back to where my friend's apartment was at. We ran for the door and shut it as fast as we could. When we were inside the house, we walked up the stairs into her apartment and tried to catch our breaths as best as we could and try to understand what had just happened. I'm not sure if we ever actually told her mom, and I know for sure we didn't go to the police station down the street as we were way too scared of crossing the man again or getting in trouble. I know, kind of a dumb mindset. I am aware that this story is not as creepy as many of the other stories shared on the show, but to us in this situation at the time, it felt like we were going to get hurt or lose our lives if we didn't find a way to lose this guy. My friend still lives there actually, and I don't remember having seen this dude ever since, but I sure hope it stays that way. My name is John, and I am a war veteran. I was a combat medic in the US Army for 12 years. This story I have is from the supernatural realm in ancient Mesopotamia. The year was 2006, and I was on my very first deployment to Iraq as a Green soldier. At this time, the war was raging at its height, and Baghdad had become the most dangerous place on Earth. President Bush had ordered a surge of 30,000 troops into the city to curb the insurgency that had grown. I was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment of the US 1st Infantry Division, and I was going to be one of those 30,000. Lucky me. I can go on and on about the combat side of things and being a medic, but this story has nothing to do with that other than the setting. During the deployment, my company's primary duties were to keep the peace and play sheriff to a lawless land. One of the things we did a lot was search and seizure of weapons, caches, and stockpiles. We had gotten word from a local farmer that had turned into a cache location on the outskirts of the city between western Baghdad and eastern Fallujah. We called this place the Badlands, and it earned its name. An ancient place full of scrub and old farms, rural living in the third world at its finest. A perfect area to hide whatever you wanted for the right price. The insurgents would pay off or threaten the locals to do their bidding, and not all of the locals would play ball. Our platoon got the tasking to go out and find it and blow it up with some EOD guys from the Navy that were helping out. Basically, we were going to be their bodyguards in a sense. As we prepped and loaded up for the patrol, I talked to my friend Swenson, who would later in the tour be seriously wounded. If this was going to be another goose hunt, he chuckled and said, "Probably, Doc, probably." We made it to the Badlands for a 35-minute drive into nothingness that makes up the rural areas just outside of the city. The darkness out there is unlike anything else. The stars are amazing as we made contact with the local Iraqi army that would guide us on to the objective. I cracked a smoke. The place was littered with broken skulls and broken walls and foundations of what used to be people in their dwellings. It looked unlike any place we had ever been in the area before. It looked ancient, like the stones used were just different from the rest of the farmhouses we had seen, blown up and scattered from the invasion back in 2003. As we were looking around, it must have been 11 p.m. or just after. It was dark as Hades itself. Lots of milling around and wasting time looking for something that would end up not being there. Apparently the local just wanted some cash and made a report thinking we would pay him. As our lieutenant put out the rally up call over the radio net, I stood up from the broken wall I was leaning on and looked over at Swenson. Right when we made eye contact came out the loudest screech I had ever heard in my life. It literally shook me to my core. I dropped my smoke and clutched my rifle like a child holding a teddy bear. The entire patrol heard it. The radio blew up with squad leaders doing comm checks and asking for situation reports. Everyone was shaken. I looked at Swenson, and he was in full combat mode. Adrenaline was pumping, and we had nothing to fight. I had never been that scared in my life. It was something deep in my soul that told me we were not supposed to be there. The lieutenant came over to the radio again and ordered everyone to mount up in the Humvees and return to base. We did not think twice about it. On the 35-minute ride back, these guys were asking each other over the intercom about the screech and scream. It was nuts. How could a noise shake up so many men armed to the teeth who had all been in a real fight? I asked myself this to this very day. I don't think I will ever have an answer for this. The land I stood on was the same land that Alexander the Great once fought on. Who knows how many souls and how much blood had been spilled in the centuries past? I hope I never find out. Thanks for reading my story. From the day I started my first job, I worked hard with the future in mind. I was determined to give my children a better life than I had. You know, the American dream and all that. When I was fortunate enough to stumble upon my wife, we discussed what we wanted from a marriage. I would discover she had the same future in mind as I did. As we jump ahead to the arrival of our first child, we quickly learned that between work and taking care of the needs of a newborn, we had zero time to take care of the small things, like keeping the house clean. We had two choices before us: allow a stranger to raise our beautiful daughter or hire a housekeeper. Naturally, we chose the latter and called a maid service. The years passed, and along with the birth of a second child, the housekeepers would come and go. Some great, some terrible. Then we were sent Donna. And she probably became part of the family, honestly. It only took a few months. She brought so much more to the family than just being a servant. The connection she formed with all of us, but especially the kids, was priceless. They were calling her Grandma Donna almost as soon as they could speak. About a year in, we asked her to come work for us, and for the next 15 years she spent 5 days a week making our lives a bit less hectic. That's why her murder would hit us all so hard. This all goes back to 1993, a time before she had come into our lives. Donna had met a man named Joe, and they had a son named Antonio. Their marriage wouldn't survive the century, but she, along with Antonio, would carry on as well as she could, sometimes working 3 jobs just to put food on the table. When she began working for us, Tony, as we call him, was still pretty young. On the occasional days she was unable to find a sitter, we were more than happy for her to bring him along. He and the kids would play for hours, giving her time to work unhindered. Unfortunately, as Tony grew older, he began getting in trouble with the law and banging heads with his mother. Tony was still coming along with Donna every now and then, but his attitude toward us generally had gradually grown sour, and we learned to keep our distance. Our lives would be forever changed on a rainy February morning in 2015. I was the last one out of the house for a change, and I'd left everything for Donna. According to later testimony, Tony had arrived about an hour after I had left. He was there to ask his mother for a loan, but she refused. He had borrowed almost $1,000 in the past few months and had not paid any of that back. An argument soon broke out and Tony became very angry. He pulled a large chef's knife from our knife block and stabbed her several times. Around 20 to be exact. Once he came to his senses, he fled and went into hiding. Perhaps the most horrible part of the attack was that Donna had not died instantly, but instead probably lived another 10 minutes or so, left to slowly bleed out on our kitchen floor, all alone. Thankfully, it wasn't the kids who discovered her body. Instead, Melina, my wife, came home for lunch and found her. The paramedics were called, but that was just a formality at that point. Tony became the prime suspect almost immediately, and the police worked day and night to track him down. We were left to mourn her loss, a process I myself am still going through. I came to see Donna as a second mother, and her death hit me like a truck. Tony was found, eventually, and given life without parole. Short of death, essentially. It's a sentence I'm happy with, but no matter the time he's given, we're never going to get Grandma Donna back. Life has never been the same since Donna's death, and once our daughter moved off to college, Molina and I began looking for a new home. For the both of us, no matter where we looked, everything was a reminder of her death. Our one-time dream home had become a nightmare, a constant reminder of a young man's selfishness. When we finally found a buyer for the house, we took up residence in a 2-bedroom condo on the beach. Life continued to drag on for a few more years. However, our son will be leaving for school soon, and we'll be free to take the tour of Europe. We've been planning for probably 20 years now. We had hoped to bring Donna along, a present for being a loyal and loving member of our household. That is sadly no longer possible. Although she may not be able to join us in the flesh, I have no doubt she will be there in spirit, looking down and guiding us just as she had all those years, sharing her love and making our family content and complete. This happened some years ago, in one of my old one-person flats. I had a strange feeling that something just was not right for a few days. Like, I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I had when I put it back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor and stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat, or so I thought. Well, one night I woke up around 1 a.m, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, was sure I woke up from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower. So I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never closed it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it, and looked at my phone to confirm someone was there. Since I could clearly see a reflection on my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain, it took me a lot not to scream and keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off and holding it to turn the water all the way hot. I'm still kind of impressed of that quick thinking. Our water got really hot, and when you cranked it all the way to hot, and a few seconds later steam was raising from the water, it hurt my feet flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman. She screamed in pain, and I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it closed behind me. A little later she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. Thank God for German quality work. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife, just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw it missing and realized there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been a former person living in the flat and was evicted for not paying rent. She made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work, and sometimes at night. It's possible that what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to know what she was thinking of doing. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed when I move into a new place. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true, disturbing stories sent in by viewers, just like you. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to hit that like button, as it truly helps me out a ton. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a disturbing story with some person, or something supernatural, or maybe something else different entirely, be sure to submit that at swampdweller.net, or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a video. I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. So what are you waiting for? Join us today. If you're on the go and can't be on YouTube all the time, Be sure to download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and just about everywhere else you listen to podcasts online. Thank you guys as always for supporting the swamp the way you do. I couldn't be here doing this every single day without you. If you guys are trying to look stylish while the Rona is running around rampant, be sure to check out the Swamp Dweller merch store. Maybe grab a face mask, or a hoodie or something, who knows. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.